may as well get started. So we just want to talk a little bit. Kim and I put the agenda together a couple days ago, and you see some slides running in the background here. And a lot of it's just for entertainment purposes, but a lot of it, some of it's some stuff I want to talk about. Some of the things that we experienced here, and some of the stuff that happened the first time we did the shelter, and then they'll talk about the sheltering a little bit on the second storm. And then there's a couple interesting letters to the editor that Phil forwarded to us about radio station communication and the Cape Cod Times. I actually missed that we can talk a little bit about. And then this, the last. So as these pictures kind of scroll through, that's Paul Berger's house. Well, Ginny wasn't
Got a
home.
big blue tarp on it.
Got a big blue tarp, doesn't it really? Yeah.
The tree's gone, the blue tarp's still.
I'm like, do I use this picture? I'm like, yeah, Ginny wouldn't care. Paul would get a huge kick out of it, so I'll feel
I took a
great.
picture to send to my dad.
Yeah, that's what we're.
So, and I guess maybe the best thing I can do is just do a little running commentary on some of these pictures. So, some of these, we talk a little bit about the first storm and the second storm, and then some lessons learned, and then we'll just kind of, I like to kind of spitball these things because I don't have all the answers.
And I missed it.
Everybody's, what's that?
I missed this.
I was in Ohio for the second
I
storm.
was in Oregon for number one.
I was out of Dodge, and I felt like as guilty as I felt like I was. We left on Monday night, and this was going to be 8 inches of snow and a little bit of wind. And by the time we got up the next morning, the Armageddon had struck. There was no coming back at that point. So, but during the first storm. Over the period of the storm, the fire department did 171 calls. Not all of those, of course, are storm related. I say all the time to people that because there's a blizzard or a hurricane, the day-to-day operation, the fire department, everything else moves on. A lot of those were medical calls that we would have done anyway. We're doing about 22 or 23 calls a day anyway now. But we did about 171 calls in that first storm. We had all kinds of issues with poles on fire, wires on the ground, live wires on the ground. Had one reported building fire during that course of that storm that turned out to not be a significant fire. But obviously, we thought that was really bad because of the transportation issues and so forth, with all the trees down and all the wires down. In the first storm, there was no snow. As it turns out, that was the warm-up for the easy one. Second storm for us was about a 3-day event here. We had storm coverage in the EOC up and running. The first storm, we had the Emergency Operations Center up and running here sort of as EOC light, where we're really just more operating as a call center. Call taking center, take a little bit of heat off the other communications agencies. Kind of a slippery slope because an EOC is an EOC, and then we have to kind of be careful, I think, about not using it for its intended purposes. You got to get a little bit of mission creep, and I think that may have happened in the second storm. Second storm, full disclosure, I was in Ohio for my daughter's national hockey tournament, and but I was as in touch as I could be with the 2 electronic leashes that I had in my pocket. My wife was driving, I was sort of 2 phoning it for the first couple of days, and then it suddenly occurred to me that I'm probably being part of the problem and not part of the solution because I'm not here. So I picked up the phone and called Deputy Smith and said, look, you're it. You got it, I'm not there. If you need me, I got both my phones. If you need me, you call me. I'm going to stop calling you. I listened into the conference calls, but I got to the point where things were really, I guess it was pretty nasty here, from what I could tell. So I called him and I said, you got it. Like you're the man. Anything that you do, I support 100%. You make the decisions and I'll back you up no matter what. And you call me if you need me. Tim and I started the same day, pretty much. So because I got one more bugle on my call, it doesn't necessarily make that much smarter than him. He's about as bright as it gets. So, and my understanding is that he did a great job. But my troops did a great job as well. I know that firsthand for the first storm. I was here for the whole thing. And I know in the second storm, I was in constant communication. Both the deputies were on, and both of them said what a fantastic job everybody did. So we did 191 calls during the course of that second storm. Amongst those 191 calls were lots of routine medical calls. Had a fall that required somebody to get med-fed, had the overdoses, had 4 building fires in the course of that 2-day period. 2 of them were legitimate working fires that required the captains are out about ready to make an interior attack on Andy's Lane. This is a great picture because the people got their lights on down there. I wonder how soon after this circuit breaker popped that those lights went out. So we had 4 legitimate fires during the course of the storm. First storm, we also opened the shelter. We'll talk a little bit about that too. The second storm, I'll talk a little bit about the whole sheltering concept for folks to about how the sheltering in Falmouth works versus warming centers and so forth. Like I said, two legitimate working fires that required assistance from out of town. This is a picture I borrowed from this great photographer guy in Waquat. I got to give him credit for it. We'll talk about this too. This is not Falmouth. This is the previous storm in New Jersey. If I can make this stop, I will. Let's see if I can make this. So we'll talk a little bit about. This is Minot Road in Falmouth during the course of the storm. This is people going to Dunkin' Donuts. At some point, somebody probably drove around a barrier. Are those wires alive? Are those wires not live? I don't know. I can tell you, we treat every wire like it's live. I've been here for 30+ years. We treat every wire like it's live. It's not worth betting your life on. And this is the previous storm in New Jersey, where a gentleman, you look hanging off the 208 north side, and there's a wire on the ground there. He drove around a barrier, contacted the underneath metal frame of his car, electrocuted him and killed him. So, and you know, there's no, the electricity in New Jersey, the electricity in Falmouth isn't kinder and gentler than the electricity in New Jersey. Like, it'll all kill you. So, it's frustrating for us because you look at, you know, I know some of these pictures I put up are from the Falmouth police, where pictures that they took where somebody, you put a barricade up with wires on the ground and people drive on your neighbor's lawn to get around the barricade. I think that's Minot Road. That's somewhere in Falmouth. It was another shot I had here of, you know, this is the, you know, you put a barricade up or wires down. The first guy up that wants to drive through pushes the barricade out of the way and drives through. Nobody's got enough resources to put a human being, a police officer or a Jersey barrier in all of these things. But if you're out driving around, if you're driving through a barricade and driving under low wires, you're part of the problem. And the electricity, when the electricity comes and goes, it will kill you. But the first house fire we had in West Falmouth was a result of the people using their fireplace to heat, which happens. The second one was when the power was starting to come back on. That's when the electrical issues started to happen. So the wires that are on the ground, Eversource does the best they can, but the wires that are on the ground become energized, and if you come in contact with them, either your house catches on fire or you get killed. So it's just a really cautionary tale that it can happen. First storm, so Falmouth is part of the Barnstable Regional Emergency Planning Committee, and there's a regional sheltering system. For many, many years, Falmouth, back in the old days, Falmouth tried to go it alone with operating as a community shelter. It's difficult, if not, I would say right now, it's impossible. It would really be impossible for Falmouth to get a shelter up and running without the resources that we get from the region. In order to open as a shelter, you have to have all kinds of support. You've got to have law enforcement support for security. You've got to have nursing, medical support. Shelters have to be able to take sort of sometimes people that are on oxygen and so forth. You have to have a nursing corps member there, or multiple nursing corps members there to screen people in and out to provide really low levels of care. You have to have EMS support in order to open a shelter. Shelters in Massachusetts have to be pet friendly, so you have to have somebody that can handle pets. You have to have the ability to feed people. And the ability to feed people, it has to be safe serve. It's not a question where we just go in and take over the school's kitchen. We don't do that on purpose. Everything that's delivered to the shelter for food is supposed to be delivered hot, so that we have no contact with any equipment at the high school at all. That's the way it's supposed to be. So it's not just, and you need people you need staff. We get resources from the Red Cross, we get resources from AmeriCorps, we get resources. This particular time when we opened, the Red Cross was struggling to feed the amount of people in the shelter. They had a MOU with, who got the food? Salvation Army. Salvation Army. Those are things that on a local level, Falmouth tried to do that and we can't. We just can't do it on a local level. That's why we're part of the region. So in that particular storm, the first storm, due to the length of the power outages and the anticipated cold, there's 5 regional shelters on Cape Cod. It was decided to open 3 of those shelters. One in the Upper Cape, one in the Mid Cape, one in the Lower Cape. We stepped up. We were good to go. We got the available number of CERT people who are really underappreciated, got the shelter up and running. I think, Helen, you could talk a little bit. I think it was 14 people overnight
Yeah, we had 14 overnight, we had 15 in
15
all.
total, yeah.
But one was just there for a few hours to
Mhm.
warm up.
Yep,
And then we also had 2 dogs and a mouse.
2 dogs and a mouse.
And a mouse, we had a mouse, yeah, we had a mouse.
That wasn't an organic mouse from the high school, like, that wasn't something that exterminators missed, or? Okay, that was a pet, okay.
No, somebody brought in, they had a pet mouse, and they brought him. We had 3 people from Falmouth, 4 from Mashpee, 2 from Pocasset, 5 from Martha's Vineyard, 1 from Sagamore Beach.
It was interesting, like, the biggest representative group at the shelter were people that were stranded over here, they couldn't get back to the island. The ferries were canceled. But I was in and out of there quite a bit, went pretty well. A couple of hiccups early on, which you're always gonna find, I think, but overall, I think it went very well.
Yeah, we started at 2 is when it was decided to open it, and they wanted to open it at 5.
Right.
So with Kim and Patrick and Chad and the AmeriCorps and Red Cross and the CERT people,
Mhm.
it opened at 5.
At 5, right, which is
And-
tough. It's a feat. It's a feat to get that organized in such a short period of time.
And we had people checking on us. Mr. Griffin checked on us. State Representative Dylan Fernandez stopped in to make sure we had everything we needed, and which was good.
Mhm.
And by 5 o'clock on Sunday morning, clients were already leaving to get towards Hole and to hopefully get on the first
Get on the
boat.
boat.
And then after that, people were just checking to see if they had power at home so they could go. And by 10:30, it was closed, picked up, everybody was gone.
Similar numbers, I think, at the shelter that Barnstable High School is the designated Mid-Cape shelter. Barnstable High School was having some electricity issues, so they actually opened up the shelter at the county complex, and I think there were a small number of people that went there overnight. And then Down Cape is the Cape Tech High School, which is in Harwich, had, I think, maybe 30 clients overnight. They seem the end of the Cape, other than Falmouth, had a little bit more electricity issues than we did. But it was a one-night deal, and then it was done. So the sheltering for the second storm, during the course of the conversations during the day when we decided we were going to open up shelters, Falmouth High School was pretty much plowed under. Our CERT people were pretty much plowed in. So Sandwich stepped up as the designated shelter for the Upper Cape. Initially, it was going to just be 2, I believe, but the third Barnstable shelter was able. So it was the same again. It was although the Upper Cape was Sandwich, Mid Cape was Barnstable High School, Lower Cape was the tech school. And I think they had a tech school at one point. I think they had 50 or 60 people. I think Sandwich had about 30 people overnight. About 6 or 7 of them were from Falmouth. I personally think that there's been a letter to the editor in the Enterprise, and another letter we'll talk about with Phil about communications, but from a regional sheltering standpoint, I think this went fantastic. Everybody that needed to get to shelters, if they chose to, could get to shelters. We had transportation lined up. Wasn't going to be an issue for us to transport people to Sandwich. The police were in line, RTA was in line. The night of the first shelter operation, when Falmouth shut down, we had an RTA driver assigned to this building overnight in order for people at last minute that needed to get to one of the other shelters. I think it worked very, very, very well. Sheltering is not convenient. It's not meant to be convenient. It's meant to be life-saving. And I'd love to have a place 24/7, 365 in the town of Falmouth that we could go to in the event of a thunderstorm, but it's just not realistic. It's just not realistic. It's very, very heavily volunteer-driven. The volunteers do a fantastic job, and even everybody's got a limited shelf life. 24 hours of being in the shelter with no sleep, you have to have relief crews, and to be able to do that on a local level right now, and to have all of those needs met, just isn't practical, and that's why Mark Sullivan, years ago, decided to go and become part of the regional program, and I think, my particular opinion is, I think it worked spectacularly. Everybody that needs to get to shelters gets to shelters. It may not be convenient, it may be 20 minutes away. We do the best we can to get transportation for people that can't get themselves there, between police, fire, RTA. We had extra people on here in the event to give people rides. I think it went very, very well. I think that because the shelter wasn't in the town of Falmouth is moot. It's my humble opinion. And then, of course, there's today, before Easter. Hallelujah. I'll take the rain. I'll take the rain. So that's kind of it. That's kind of Greg, my computer's smarter than I am. See, that's where I'm going next week. Sorry. Don't know what I'm doing here. Ready for a vacation? I didn't even put that in there on purpose. It says ready for a vacation. Okay, well, we'll have to look at this because I can't figure out how to make my screensaver come on. Oh, there it is. Again, though, just a couple other things that, so interesting, I think an interesting picture, there's an arcing wire up there burning on the top of the pole, and the house down below's got electricity. I'm speculating not for long. Once that circuit breaker popped, I would imagine that was it. That's the fire on Andy's Lane. That's the fire the night before in West Falmouth. It was a petition fire. You know, those power lines are potentially live. Those power lines are potentially communicating some of that electricity into the wet ground. So you don't even have to touch the wire. And that happens. Another building fire, another building fire. Great picture of people driving by power lines, and this is the guy in New Jersey that got himself killed. But, you know, a lot of these, this was all pretty typical. I mean, I lost a bunch of trees in my, Woods Hole, the night day of the first storm, this was down about the first high tide. Some of these houses were starting to sort of float off their foundations. That's a bummer.
Chief, do you have any idea how many trees actually went down and blocked roads during those storms?
Too many to come. I can speak to the first. During the first storm, there was probably a several-hour period where 5 or 6 major roads were blocked. Hurley Boulevard, Fresh Pond Road, Old Dock Road had a tree down for a long time.
I probably guesstimate the second storm was probably a couple hundred. The list was extensive.
The issue, the overriding issue, which we started to do, I believe, in the second storm, which I think was really helpful, is that the problem being that any tree that's down that's entangled in wires, the DPW can't touch until Eversource has determined that it's de-energized. So if it's a tree that's across the road, the DPW goes out there with the resources they've got to get the roads open. If it's anywhere entangled up in wires, there's a whole nother layer to it, because it has to be certified to be de-energized before anybody can go and put a chainsaw to it. So that's why I know that the one on Old Dock Road, some of the ones that were big trees up across major roads sat there for a while. Jones Road was the same because they're tangled up in wires. And it's just not as simple to just say, hey, can you just send a crew out there with a chainsaw and cut the thing out, because it's got to be certified de-energized. Interesting. Phil, you want to talk a little bit about?
Chief, before you do that, is there
Sure.
an official designation with a warming center versus a shelter, or is
So-
that kind of an unofficial thing that goes, is time-based or?
Time-based, time of day-based, day of week based, if it's like, say, Town Hall, which is open, and do they have electricity? We've endeavored to get Town Hall open as a warming shelter. We've endeavored to get the rec building open
In the library?
in the library, but they gotta have power. So Phil, you wanna take this? You sent this to us, so.
Sure, I went ahead and picked a couple articles out of the paper with, that have been sent in over the period of time after the storm, and it has to do with communications. And the issue with the communications was the lack thereof to the general public that we had during the storm. And the issue, when we're dealing with the things that we get used to today with the internet and the phone service, cell phones, all of that kind of stuff, people are not familiar with what to do at the point in time that they have no communications anywhere. And the articles in the paper kind of revert back to the old days where you just go ahead and come up with use of a radio station. And it's something that we've talked about in our committee in the past, and trying to get the radio stations on board with current information that we can go ahead and get to the public. There's many things that people would like to know, and all of a sudden they're sitting at home and they're in the dark. And these two folks in the paper, one was a retired firefighter paramedic from Orleans, and the other one is a gentleman down in Sandwich that wrote letters to the editor, and we're really directing it towards the use of regular ordinary old radio stations, and the fact that people have battery-powered radios at home. but we don't have that click between information getting to the radio stations and the radio stations getting it back to the public. We haven't made it known as to which radio stations that the people can actually go to. You can run around and tune on your dial and you're probably not going to find the information that you're looking for. I think one of the suggestions in going with what is suggesting and teaming up with the radio stations is to come up with timely, current information. I know that in the ham radio world, we connect up every 1 hour. So on the hour, you can go and you can get information, and that's kind of what I think the model should be with the local radio stations, or the radio stations that people can actually go ahead and hear. So that they're not burning up your batteries at home if you've got limited ones, if they know that it's, you know, at 8 o'clock you're going to get information, you'll get an update at 9 o'clock. So you'll be able to keep the information, and it also gives the Emergency Operations Center and the town manager and those types of people who want to put out information, they would know, well, I really want to get it into the news stations at quarter of, so they can broadcast the information out there. It's something that's been talked about. It isn't a new concept. It's something that used to happen, and I think that putting initiative in there and moving forth with that would accommodate a lot of misinformation that's out there. Should I go to the shelter? Where is the shelter? Is the shelter open? Which roads are closed if I need to go to the shelter? I went to the shelter the very first night to go ahead and do the radio communications, and I found out that I couldn't get to the shelter. That I'm trying to figure out, well, where do I go? I go down Brick Hill Road, I've got the road blocked. I turn around and I go the other way. Eventually I got to the shelter by going down Trotting Park Road. But again, that information, if you're trying to move people back and forth and people want to get to where they want to go, I believe the radio stations are really the backup source to all of this, and setting up information flow to them and then out to the public would be a worthwhile effort.
And I think that we recently had somebody from the station in Woods Hole here.
We did,
And
yes.
we've got some sort of
Mindy
relationship.
came.
Yeah, we
right?
need to, I think maybe we need to tweak that a little bit. What's their generator status, and or who
Right.
has generator status? You know, it doesn't even necessarily have to be in Falmouth,
Mhm.
but somebody out there that can push that message out in a low-tech way, which it's a really valid point.
Yeah, I think that she has done some work for the Barnstable County on this, and I'm also thinking that maybe this should be also handled at the regional level.
Mhm.
Because I know she provides information to the MAC, and then they go ahead and get the they give information to her. And there's no reason why this couldn't be brought up to where the local higher power radio stations would be able to pick up. But some of the power that she puts out, and it's not also after midnight, it's difficult to go ahead and do things. She would have to do it remotely
Right.
and so on. But I think some of the major radio stations, if we could team up with them, maybe at a regional basis or something, but I think it's something that should be evaluated
We'll
and
definitely,
pushed through.
we'll definitely kick that up. I know we talked about it, but I sort of see the stalls, so maybe.
Close that gap
Good lesson
in there,
learned, yeah.
to provide a central way of getting information out to the people, particularly if you don't want people to use certain roads.
Right, right.
You know.
The only thing I did touch on briefly though, but I know all you school guys are here, I know everything seemed to go okay. I know we had a little issue with a burner left on, that's gonna fall on us, we'll do a better job. We don't anticipate using any of the stuff at the school like that, everything's brought in, the shelter tries to be completely self-sufficient. So somebody probably didn't get that memo. But we just need to we'll do a better walkthrough, a better sort of, we need to communicate that to the volunteer staff better, which we'll do, and then we'll just do a better, the last guy through. So we just need to.
We just thank the folks at the EOC and this last one.
Yeah.
Being able to set up shop here and
Mhm.
sort of help to use this as a sort of a command center for the communicating with our guys at the schools to try to get the schools back online was huge help.
So in the second storm, I mean, like I said, I wasn't here, but we sort of in the previous storm, and even the previous big storm since I've been the fire chief, we haven't really fully opened the EOC as an emergency operations center. We haven't had to, but in this particular storm, it's one of those storms where, you talk about the incident command system and national incident management system and stuff. all being, the beauty of them is that they're scalable. And that's the reason that so in the fire department, we use the incident command system every day. We use it on the smallest incident, because it's the smallest incident in the fire service, the same incident that you think, we were talking today, I had a meeting with the groups about a building fire we had on Main Street a few years ago, the laundromat. I'd love to have that one back, because it was a small fire when we got there, very small. And then 4 hours later, it was nothing but a pile of smoldering bricks. Because little incidents get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. In this particular, so that's why the incident command system and the national incident management system, that's why they are designed the way they are, because they're scalable. And I think this is a perfect example of a storm that became very scalable. What started out in here as 2 guys in a call center morphed into, and I think from what I understand, we can hot wash a little bit of that too. I haven't really had a chance to talk to both the deputies, but when you have a representative from DPW here, incredibly helpful. Representative from the schools here, incredibly helpful. Representative from anybody that can answer the phone and tell people, they want to let you know that their power's out or that their road's unplowed, very helpful. And I think that was the path we started on. To have all of those representatives in this one room is really, really helpful. And that's so I'm glad it worked out. But that we take your thanks, and we're glad it worked out for you, but it works out for us too. So that's the beauty of it. It's kind of a two-way street. So,
Chief, that's the reason we have some extra people here today. We're going to try and have somebody here at the EOC. Donnie and Kevin live close by. They can get here. They can speak for the schools, and I'll try and get in, and so we can have a representation here.
the technology exists in this room, and we're in the process of moving forward to a different phone system. But the technology exists in this room where EOC can take a call and transfer it to the school representative, or transfer it to the DPW representative, or transfer it to the Coast Guard representative. We have the ability to do that. The overwhelming majority of the time, it consists of Boyd putting something on hold and going, hey, is there school today? Or hey, what's the water situation down at the Coast Guard base? Where you kind of do it like, face-to-face communication works out very well. But that technology exists to do that. We just haven't had to quite get to that. Although I think we were teetering on it last weekend. We were getting close.
We slid up the scale a little bit.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of you're setting up ESFs to some degree
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the whole, for the town.
For the town, yeah.
It's a great idea.
Just a suggestion from, if they're willing to come, for an agenda item at a future LEPC meeting would be folks from Eversource to show up and try to give us some idea of how do they see their grid and
Right.
what kind of view they actually have.
At one
a
point, I know
town by
during this
town.
storm, somebody from Eversource, but I don't know if they were in the EOC or if they were doing damage assessment.
We had a body from Eversource here that they were the tree and wire guy, and all that Eversource crew was doing at that time was minimizing the hazard.
Mhm.
So they might go out to those lines that are down, and they're gonna minimize the thing, but they're not fixing and not repairing, they're just making it safe and moving on.
One thing that I've made a note for myself for the next regional meeting that I'm at to discuss with Eversource is, I don't know if it's possible, I think, my humble opinion as the emergency management guy and the fire chief is that if we've got an EOC set up or a shelter set up, I'd like to be able to know when you're demobilizing, does Cape Woods Drive have electricity?
That's it.
And
Exactly
it's tough for
what-
them, I know, because they can't look, Eversource doesn't have the ability, we've done a little research into this, Eversource doesn't have the ability to say that my house has electricity, because there may be a service drop issue, there may be something internal to my house, but just to be able to have a better idea. At one point, I was in Ohio making phone call, talking to the Sandwich Fire Chief, because that's where the shelter was, about does this, and we had to send people out physically to go drive and look at, and I think I'm hopeful that there's some technology out there. I understand that maybe that's not something that,
It's my understanding that they have that at the MAC level.
Right.
At the MAC,
It just-
you can call up and say, hey, listen, this is.
but as you know, you get, it would be so much more efficient if we could just do that in here than having to call the MAC. 'Cause
Right.
then, the MAC's jumping, and the more,
The example of that is, what you're right though, it's an area-wise, because, for instance, a family member of mine received a message that said, power's restored at the house. Then you go back, and the 4 houses are still out in the street. They restored an area, so they sent that mass text messaging out that you get when you dial the published number. Doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, it's not could be a localized
Right.
issue. These 4 houses happen to be at the end of the street, so there's still a line.
one other thing that I actually spoke about in one of the conference calls, and we don't beat up on Eversource because Eversource isn't here, and my opinion, nobody's looking for miracles in a lot of these storms. We understand that the line crews are working as hard as they can. I expressed to them, and I think it was the previous storm, they did the same thing, where the information that they pushed out to the general public was sort of the doomsday. Your power will be restored on Cape Cod. You know, this was on Monday. By Friday, we expect you having your power back up. And that Friday reference is what they call the onesies and twosies. That's the 1 and 2, that's the long private road, that's the isolated 1 and 2. Right now, there's probably 1 or 2 people in Falmouth in any given day. And that sort of doomsday communication was making people very upset. And it was causing, I don't care if the information you're giving me is bad news, I just need the bad news. Like we need the information to know, to be able to make sheltering decisions and make all kinds of decisions like that. I thought that, and I'm gonna bring that up at the regional level, and that's probably something that's gonna go. You know, again, I'm not beating up on Eversource, I'm not beating up on the people that deliver the message, you know, that's just the way it is, but I think that, you know, people saying, getting a text message saying, your power will be restored in 5 days, and people freaked out. And they get home and 30 minutes later their power was on, because Eversource had a pretty good idea that this large group was about to come up and this large group was about to come up. And so I thought that was, there's got to be there's a better way in there somewhere.
I mean, it almost felt like with every shift, we had to remind Eversource that we had 5 schools without power.
Right.
So I don't understand technically what they see versus what is our responsibility to keep reminding them that, hey, we've got schools out, we've got schools out, that type of thing. So that's kind of understanding the information flow, because it felt like it was one way as opposed to them ever giving us any information back.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, Chief, I was just going to make a kind of a generalized comment on a few things. First of all, I appreciate all the volunteers. Being part of CERT, I realize how difficult it is to get those numbers, get those people committed, and they have the same kinds of, you know, of personal issues for sheltering in place, et cetera. And kind of like just make a comment about what Phil may have been talking about as well. One of our challenges, obviously, is to get the places and people and systems in town available when we need the sheltering or we need certain EOC activities. But there's also a responsibility ahead of time for public awareness, you know, public outreach and public training. Because if we make these kinds of things happen, and we've been doing a little bit better job of that to try and understand how people can learn to shelter in place and how not to freak out and to be able to have the batteries. And hopefully, you know, if you continue to do those things, you can do a little bit better job. And it is interesting that in demobilizing any shelters or warming stations or anything else, that it's a real challenge, because not only at people's individual houses, but there are 2 things. One is through Eversource particular access to the portal. The portal allows you to know if there's certain areas that are truly up or down. Certain levels of access to the portal, be it at the MAC or as an individual, are different. But when I say public outreach, and this is something that we, I think, at CERT try and do all the time in conjunction with you know, the emergency management, is that there are things you can do actually at your own house. But we would do a lot in demobilization, and I know it sounds a little ridiculous because nobody has a landline anymore, I guess. But you always should, and if you have a $20 answering machine on it, you can call your own house. And if that answering machine answers, you know you have power. Same thing with people who now have more sophisticated systems that have wireless internet and thermostats.
Home security systems.
Home security systems. So even in past storms, we actually were able to do a pretty good job of having people take some responsibility on their own, call a neighbor, call this, do this, or actually call your house. I would like to say that, so that at least the public knows, and I'm sure you know this, Chief, you did an excellent job about talking about how to activate a regional sheltering system and what it really takes. Falmouth has the capability of opening a minimized shelter, but it's difficult to be able to provide all the things in your list, and we have a liability and responsibility, and you know, if we're using public buildings to do those kinds of things. So that's hard to do, and one of the greatest challenges is when to pull that trigger. Because a lot of times we used to talk about the 24-hour in advance rule, and you know, with the best laid plans of weather and forecasting, you really don't know. In these particular groups of storms, if Frank was here, I think he would tell us that it's probably the most challenging, you know, meteorological forecasting they've anticipated in a long time. So I think it's important that people know that you know, if you want to do warming shelters, they still require staff. And if it's a library or it's a, you know, a rec center, I mean, sooner or later, that you can't do them 24 hours a day. So I think it's a two-edged sword. Like you said earlier, a shelter is in Hilton, you know, it's a life security, life-saving kind of operation. So I don't want anybody to be disappointed that they think they had to go 20 miles to a shelter. A lot of incidents where those 20 miles are, you know, that's not the objective, as you mentioned earlier. So I think it's important that people realize that and take a certain level of responsibility to prepare themselves.
And really, the rule of thumb in the emergency preparedness business is you gotta be prepared to shelter in place for 72 hours. That's the rule of thumb, that's the rule of thumb in the world, 72 hours. Winter, summer, doesn't matter. You need enough water, you need enough non-perishable food, you need enough batteries, enough flashlights, and enough blankets and so forth to be able to shelter in place for 72 hours. And that's really, that's kind of what, that's what gets, that's not me, that's the national message that gets preached to everybody across the country. That you've got to take a little bit of responsibility and be prepared for 72 hours.
And just in closing, I'd just like to say as kind of like a PSA, between CERT and you know, emergency management and support of Falmouth Fire Rescue, we're willing to go to any group or organization, small, large, and teach or tell what we know about sheltering in place and preparing, you know, for emergency situations. Because every time we do that, you know, and that person tells two people, tells their family, it's kind of better for all.
I appreciate it.
So we're happy to do that. And I think the easiest way is to notify Kim probably at Fire Rescue.
We'll talk to any group that wants to listen.
And we'll go out there and tell the story.
Chief, following up on what you're saying about the 72 hours, and you're saying if you stop and think about this last event we went through, the event rolled in on Tuesday, and by Thursday, Pat, would you say it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock? They'd restored most of the power to the town of Falmouth, and so we're well within the 72 hour
Right.
window of sheltering in place.
Right.
So if you practice the shelter in place, you know, you could weather this thing out a lot better. It's just being prepared ahead of time, not at the moment.
Chief, obviously I'm involved in communications. The other part of it is the visual communication, some of the things that I saw and some of the things I was told. A good example is signage and the lack thereof signage at the right time. It was well into a few days later that the intersection of Clark Street and John Parker opened up. And you had to come all the way down John Parker, all the way to Clark Street, only to be turned around to go all the way back up to Sandwich Road. If there were signs that were put at the entrance to these places indicating that it's closed at Clark Street, people could find their way to Clark Street that lived on, you know,
Right.
John Parker Road.
Right.
So those types of things are something that might be put in somebody's toolbox somewhere. You could have signs prepared.
I know that the
in
county just recently took, Boston Fire Academy took possession of a small number of mobile
Right.
signs. The issue is it's first come, first serve. So, yeah, but I mean, I know that we've got the town has one, I think the police have one or two mobile signs.
So there might
It's
be
something to
three
think
in
about,
town.
especially for a major intersection.
Yeah, but I mean, even if it was just, you know, something you could write in, okay? It may not have to be electronic. I mean, in other words, you don't want to go all the
Right.
way down to the barriers.
Right.
Then turn around,
Right.
particularly if the barriers are there with live wires down. The
Right.
signs need to be way back there instead of people getting all the way down there and then trying to drive through.
Very true, yeah. If an intersection that has a traffic light does not have power, it's a four-way stop. It's a
I think
four-way
people are aware
stop.
of that.
You wouldn't think so.
It's not a free-for-all. It's a four-way stop. Make note.
Sandwich and 151.
Well, that's all I've got. Questions, comments, suggestions? Good job. I think overall, I think everybody, you know, I think, you know, a lot of people in the room, again, the stakeholders, this meetings are important. I think, you know, all things being considered, I know the first one went very well. I was here for the first one, not necessarily in charge, but I think the second one went, nobody got hurt. And I think everything went as well as could be expected in Falmouth, so. Okay, thank you.